everybody. Welcome to our online worship service. My name is Amanda. I get to be one of the pastors here, and I'm excited that you are with us for worship today for part 2 in our message series, Find Your People, Love Your Neighbors. In part 1, last week, we talked about how God created us for relationship. God created us to need and know each other. But if we're honest, that's not what we live like. And I don't know about you, but I don't think living that way is working out all that well for us. Maybe you've heard the stats already, but people today are lonely. In a time where technology can keep us more connected than ever, people today are experiencing more loneliness and disconnection and isolation than ever before. And that's bad for us. The United States Surgeon General has released a new advisory bringing attention once again to the public health issue of loneliness, social isolation, and disconnection in our country. Loneliness is bad for our physical, mental, and societal health. Earlier this year, the American Psychological Association came out with a poll showing that 1 to 3 adults in this country experience loneliness once a week. And there are so many disciplines that are looking at this problem of loneliness right now. Everybody from doctors to mental health professionals to teachers to parents to pastors, even economists are looking at the problem of loneliness. And apparently working adults could be missing out on $8,000 to $12,000 of potential earning every year as a result of social disconnection, social isolation, and loneliness. It's this tricky problem to look at, really, because loneliness, it sounds like an individual problem. Like if I'm feeling lonely, that's a me problem. And if you're feeling lonely, that's a you problem. But we're finding that the problem of loneliness, it's often showing up in tandem or in conjunction with mental health issues. And so it's kind of a chicken and an egg. What came first, this experience of loneliness or this mental health challenge? One of the things that we're learning about loneliness and isolation is that it's really an us problem. It's not a me problem, it's not a you problem, it's an us problem. We're learning that our communities are structured in ways that promote individualism and unintentionally perpetuate loneliness. And we're seeing, like we've seen with a lot of different kinds of social problems, marginalized communities are more vulnerable to experiencing this problem of loneliness and isolation. So groups like new mothers or veterans or the elderly or Gen Z, our young adults, are groups that are all experiencing loneliness, social isolation at higher rates. So that's why we're talking about this, because you know what our church is made up of? Our church is made up of people like new mothers and some veterans and the elderly, older folks, and Gen Z, our younger folks. Our church is made up of communities like this, so we have to assume that folks in our community that our church reaches are struggling with loneliness more than we want to admit. So that's why we're talking about it. Finding your people, finding people who help you not experience loneliness can be hard, especially when you're younger, especially when you're a teenager. Maybe you're still figuring out who you are and what's important to you. You're going through a lot of different changes all the time during your adolescent years. Sometimes you find yourself growing up or growing out of a certain friend group. Other times you realize that the group of people you spend all your time with isn't the group where you can actually be yourself and feel most comfortable. Maybe you've been pushed out or left behind by a group of friends. This is actually a common experience that those who traveled with us to our mission trip to Pittsburgh experienced. I couldn't actually believe how many times this same story thread was popping up from our younger students to our oldest students to even the program leader and some of our adult leaders on the trip could talk about moments where they had outgrown a friend group, where they'd been left behind by a friend group, where they didn't know who or what their friend group was anymore. Even the program leader who was doing the evening speaking each night had stories to share about times in high school where they didn't know who their friend group was anymore. In a lot of ways, I think our trip was healing for this particular group of students we brought on the trip because they had a chance to share about their common experience. They had a chance to hear that they were not alone, that other people had gone through and become on the other side of what they've experienced. We had a group of students that had a big age difference. 11 years old was our youngest students and 19 was our oldest students. And I didn't really know how they were all going to come together, how they would get along. And I witnessed how God used us that week and our different experiences and our different ages and what we had gone through to support and encourage and be there for one another. PRPC students exist to engage and inspire teenagers to share God's love, grow in faith, and serve our neighbors. And there's something that our students have expressed that they experience with our group that is different than other groups they spend time with. And I think I know why. You might too. It's because of Jesus. When Jesus was preparing to return to the Father after being punished and suffering on the cross, he was trying to prepare the disciples also for what was to come next. In the midst of washing the disciples' feet in the act of this servant love and telling Peter, one of his closest friends and followers, that his faith would waver and he would doubt who Jesus is and deny him. In the midst of all of that, Jesus says this to his followers: "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will come to know that you are my disciples if you love one another." At PRPC students, we have made this our mission to share the unconditional, radically inclusive love of Jesus with every teenager we meet. You don't have to want to go to church. We do know that some teenagers get dragged to church by their parents. You don't have to want to read the Bible or sing our church songs. You don't have to want to believe in God or want anything to do with the church. You don't have to do anything for us, for me, to love you like Jesus would. That is what we do. Just by being here, you belong here. But let's be honest, that is not how most people grow up feeling about church. Church for a lot of people was a place with a lot of strings attached, a place where you had to be perfect, never mess up, never doubt, never ask questions. That facade of the perfect Christian who has it all put together, it's just that, it's a facade, and it's not helping us. So for our students, for their parents, for their families, the message that we want to send is the opposite. We believe because of who Jesus is and how Jesus loved, you always get to belong here. Even before you might believe Jesus is who he says he is. Even if you never believe what we believe about Jesus, you get to belong here. And those aren't just words that we live out. Those aren't just words we say. They are values that we live out. And we got to see this on the mission trip one more time this year with our two oldest students, Maeve and Lexi. So Maeve, if you've been around us, you might remember, worked on our staff last summer as our summer intern. She got involved with our church through a hunger program that we host here called Sunday Night Suppers. When I took Maeve on her first mission trip, she spent the whole time kind of saying how she wasn't really a part of our youth group. She would say things like, well, I don't go to this church, or I'm not part of the youth group, I just know Amanda, which was all true. But by the end of the week, she knew what I had already known to be true, that she was one of us. And by the end of the week, she was saying, I feel like I found a youth group. So Maeve got more involved with PRPC, and she became an intern, and she worked here last summer. And even when her family up and moved to Massachusetts, when she went to college, she decided to come back and be a part of our mission trip this summer. And she invited her best friend, Lexi. Lexi had no idea what this mission trip was like, what we were really doing, but she has always been somebody up for an adventure and always up for service, and she wanted to spend a week with her best friend. And so I think it was like the second or third night Maeve came up to me and she said, Lexi, like, couldn't believe how welcoming and inviting this youth group was. She said, you know, I can't believe that they don't just think of me as Maeve's friend, but they want to know me. Like, they want to know who Lexi is. And Maeve was like, yeah, that's how it works. When she told me the story, I just kind of like wrapped her in a hug and I was like, yeah, that is how it works. That might not sound like a big deal. It might sound very simple or not like a moment worth sharing, but it is actually the foundation of what we do here and how God is using us to share God's love with the next generation. It's making a difference. But we don't want that to just be true for students.